A disabled puppy crawls to a veterinary clinic, his tiny body burned and broken, and when the vet realizes why, he calls 911. What begins as a desperate rescue quickly spirals into something far darker. The puppy's injuries aren't just from an accident. They're a warning, a clue to a crime no one saw coming. Behind the smoke and fire hides a ruthless force, willing to burn everything and everyone in its way. As secrets are uncovered and lives are thrown into danger, one question remains: can the truth be exposed before it's too late? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Rain drummed against the windows of Langley Animal Clinic as Greer Langley finished organizing the last of the day's files. The clock on the wall showed 7:30 in the evening, and she was looking forward to heading home after a long day. Thunder cracked overhead, making the old building's walls shudder. A scratching sound at the front door caught her attention. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but then she heard it again, more desperate this time. Greer hurried to the entrance, her heart skipping a beat when she saw what awaited her. Barely visible in the dim porch light was a small puppy dragging himself across the wet concrete. His back legs weren't working, and the sight made her stomach turn. Without hesitation, she flung open the door. "Oh my goodness," she gasped, carefully scooping up the trembling animal. The puppy's fur was singed, and an awful chemical smell clung to him. "Dr. Rourke! Dr. Rourke, come quick!" Hollis Rourke emerged from his office, his weathered face showing immediate concern as he took in the scene. "Bring him to exam room 1, he commanded, his voice steady but urgent. Under the bright examination lights, the full extent of the puppy's injuries became clear. Its paw pads were badly blistered, whiskers singed nearly to the skin, and there was that unmistakable odor, something Hollis recognized from his years of experience. "This isn't just any burn," he muttered, carefully examining the puppy's fur. "I recognize this smell. It's a specialty accelerant, the kind used in deliberate fires." His hands moved efficiently as he checked the pup's vital signs. Greer assisted, holding the whimpering animal still while Hollis worked. "Who would do something like this?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Let's check for a microchip," Hollis suggested, reaching for the scanner. The device beeped almost immediately, and both of them leaned in to read the display. "Lenore Briggs," Greer read aloud. "That's the old farmhouse on County Road 12, isn't it?" "Only about 2 miles from here." Hollis's expression darkened. "These burns are fresh," he said, examining the blisters more closely. "And that chemical smell, it's still strong, still volatile. This happened very recently." He straightened up, his professional demeanor hardening into something more urgent. "We need to call 911. This isn't just an injured animal. This is evidence of a crime." While Hollis reached for the phone, Greer couldn't shake the feeling that time was critical. "Dr. Rourke, someone needs to go to that address. What if Mrs. Briggs is hurt? What if she's trapped?" "It's too dangerous," Hollis argued, even as he dialed. "We should wait for the authorities." But Greer persisted, her heart racing with worry. "She's all alone out there. Every minute could count." She could see Hollis wavering, his conscience warring with caution. "Please, we have to try." After giving the emergency dispatcher the details, Hollis looked at Greer for a long moment. The puppy whimpered on the exam table, as if adding its own plea to Greer's argument. "All right," he finally conceded, already moving to gather supplies. "But we do this smart. I'll bring my emergency kit, and we stay together." He quickly prepared the exam room for evidence preservation, carefully documenting the puppy's condition with photographs and securing samples of the chemical residue in sealed containers. They could hear sirens in the distance as they rushed out to Hollis's truck, the sound growing louder as emergency vehicles responded to the call. The rain was coming down even harder now, and Greer's hands shook as she buckled her seatbelt. "Head west on County Road 12, she directed. though Hollis already knew the way. The windshield wipers fought against the downpour as they drove through the darkness, both of them scanning the horizon for any sign of flames. The sirens were getting closer, their wailing echoing off the surrounding hills. Greer clutched the dashboard as Hollis took a sharp turn, his truck's headlights cutting through the rain. Her mind kept going back to the injured puppy they'd left in the care of the emergency vet tech they'd called in. What kind of person would do this? She wondered aloud, her voice barely audible over the storm and the engine. Someone who doesn't care who gets hurt, Hollis replied grimly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Someone who's willing to use an innocent animal to send a message. They drove on through the tempestuous night, both knowing that whatever awaited them at Lenore Briggs's farmhouse would change everything. The rising wail of sirens followed them into the darkness, a soundtrack to their race against time. The road ahead disappeared into blackness, broken only by the sweep of their headlights and the occasional flash of lightning. Every second felt crucial, every moment potentially life-changing. They were no longer just a veterinarian and his receptionist. They were first responders racing toward what could be a tragedy in the making. Hollis's truck pushed through the storm, carrying them closer to whatever awaited at the Briggs farmhouse. The sirens behind them grew louder, but they knew they might be the first ones to arrive. Sometimes, Greer thought, being first meant everything. Sometimes it meant the difference between life and death. The headlights of Hollis's truck cut through the rain as they rounded the bend toward the Briggs farmhouse. Greer's heart stopped when she saw thin wisps of gray smoke curling from under the eaves, barely visible in the darkness. "There's smoke!" she shouted, already unbuckling her seatbelt before Hollis had fully stopped the vehicle. "Call it in." They rushed toward the old farmhouse, the gravel crunching under their feet. The smell of smoke grew stronger with each step. Through the front window, Greer spotted an overturned wheelchair lying on its side in the living room. "Lenore!" she called out, pounding on the door. When no one answered, she tried the handle. It was unlocked. Smoke billowed out as she pushed it open. Hollis grabbed her arm. "Wait for the fire department." But Greer couldn't wait. Not with Lenore inside. She pulled free from his grip and dropped to her hands and knees, crawling beneath the thickening smoke. The heat pressed down on her back as she made her way inside. A support beam had partially collapsed, forcing her to wiggle underneath it. "Lenore!" she called again, her voice rough from the smoke. "Where are you?" A weak cough answered from her left. Through the haze, she could make out Lenore's form lying near her overturned wheelchair. The elderly woman was conscious but clearly struggling to breathe. "I'm coming," Greer called, inching her way toward her. The floor creaked ominously under her weight. Heat radiated from somewhere behind the walls, and she could hear the crackle of flames growing louder. When she reached Lenore, the older woman clutched at her arm. "The puppy," she wheezed. "Did you find him?" "He's safe at the clinic," Greer assured her, already beginning to drag Lenore toward the door. "We need to get you out of here now." The heat was becoming unbearable. Sweat ran down Greer's face as she pulled Lenore inch by inch across the floor. Her arms burned with the effort, but she couldn't stop. Not when they were so close to the door. A sharp hissing sound cut through the roar of the fire. Greer's blood ran cold as she recognized it, the propane cylinder in the corner of the room. Without thinking, she threw herself over Lenore's body just as the cylinder exploded. The blast rocked the house. Shrapnel whizzed through the air, embedding itself in walls and furniture. Greer felt something hot graze her arm, but kept moving. Desperate to reach the porch dot suddenly, hands were grabbing them both. Through smoke-stung eyes, Greer saw firefighters in full gear pulling them to safety. As they cleared the doorway, the porch gave an almighty groan and collapsed behind them, sending up a shower of sparks. Strong arms helped Greer to her feet, and she found herself looking into a familiar face, one she hadn't seen in years. Captain Dax Coltrane, her brother, stood before her in his firefighting gear, his expression unreadable behind his professional mask. Their eyes locked for a long moment. All the unspoken words, the years of silence, the family dinners missed, it all hung between them like the smoke in the air. But now wasn't the time. Dax turned away first, barking orders to his crew as they worked to contain the blaze. Paramedics swarmed around them. Lenore was quickly loaded onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask pressed to her face. Despite her obvious exhaustion, she reached out and caught Greer's hand as they wheeled her past. "Thank you," she whispered through the mask, her eyes full of tears. Greer could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She watched as they loaded Lenore into the waiting ambulance, its red and white lights painting the wet ground in alternating colors. A soft whimper drew her attention to the clinic carrier she'd brought from the truck. The injured puppy was still there, swaddled in towels, watching the scene with wide eyes. Greer knelt beside him, letting his presence anchor her as the adrenaline began to fade. Looking back at the smoking farmhouse, now swarming with firefighters, Greer felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. What had seemed like a simple rescue was taking on a darker shape. The accelerant they'd smelled on the puppy, the propane cylinder's suspicious placement, the speed with which the fire had spread, none of it felt accidental. Hollis appeared at her side, his face grimy with soot. "Are you okay?" he asked, examining the graze on her arm where the shrapnel had caught her. "I'm fine," she said, unable to take her eyes off the scene before them. "But this wasn't just a fire, was it?" "No," Hollis agreed grimly. "This smells like a crime." In the distance, Greer could see Dax directing his crew, his movements precise and controlled. He didn't look her way again, but she could feel the weight of all their shared history pressing down as heavily as the smoke had moments ago. She hugged the carrier closer, drawing comfort from the puppy's warmth. Whatever was going on here, she had a feeling this was just the beginning. The flashing lights of fire trucks and police cars painted the wet pavement in alternating red and blue. Fire investigators moved methodically through the charred remains of Lenore's farmhouse, their flashlights sweeping across blackened walls and burned furniture. Greer watched from beneath the shelter of a pop-up canopy, her clothes still damp from the rain and rescue. One of the investigators, a woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, walked over to where Captain Dax Coltrane stood conferring with his crew. Their hushed conversation carried an unmistakable tension. Greer edged closer, catching fragments of their discussion. "Multiple points of origin," the investigator said quietly. "Professionally placed. Timing devices recovered from 3 locations." Dax's jaw tightened. "You're certain?" "No question." This was deliberate. The words hit Greer like a physical blow. She stumbled back toward Hollis's truck, her mind racing. Back at the clinic, they had treated dozens of animals from another suspicious fire just 6 months ago, the old Marshall property. That land had been quickly bought up by developers after the accidental blaze destroyed the historic barn. The same sharp, chemical smell that had clung to the injured puppy's fur had been present then too. Greer remembered it clearly because they'd had to wear masks while treating the affected animals. That property sale had gone through suspiciously fast after the fire. "We need to get back to the clinic," she told Hollis, who was checking on Lenore as paramedics prepared to transport her to the hospital. "There's something I need to verify." Dax intercepted them as they headed for the truck. "Where are you going?" "The state fire marshal will want statements. The puppy needs treatment," Greer said, not meeting her brother's eyes. "We'll come back." At the clinic, Greer went straight to their records while Hollis tended to the injured pup. She pulled the files from the Marshall fire, scanning through their notes. There it was, the same distinctive chemical smell noted in their observations. "Hollis," she called out. "Remember the Marshall property fire? The accelerant, it's the same one." "I'm sure of it." Hollis looked up from where he was carefully cleaning the puppy's burns. That land deal that went through so quickly afterward? You think there's a connection? Has to be. And now Lenore's property. Greer's voice trailed off as she thought about the elderly woman's stubborn refusal to sell her land to developers over the years. Dax arrived while they were still discussing it, his firefighter's uniform showing traces of smoke and water damage. The state's handling the investigation, he said firmly. Let them do their job. Greer, don't go poking around where you shouldn't. Someone tried to kill Lenore, Greer shot back. And that puppy crossed through fire to get help. We can't just sit back and wait for bureaucracy to grind along while someone might try again. You're not a detective, Dax insisted, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone that had always driven her crazy when they were growing up. You're a veterinary receptionist. Leave this to the professionals. The puppy whimpered from the treatment table, drawing their attention. His bandaged legs and singed fur were stark reminders of what had happened. Hollis carefully documented each injury with photographs, storing them securely on an encrypted drive along with detailed medical records. Evidence, he explained quietly when Dax raised an eyebrow. Just in case. After Dax left, Greer helped Hollis settle the puppy into one of their recovery kennels. The little dog's eyes followed their movements, still showing fear but also growing trust. Looking at him, Greer couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Someone had deliberately set that fire, knowing Lenore was inside. They might try again. I'm staying tonight, she announced, already dragging a cot from the supply room. He shouldn't be alone, and I want to monitor him closely. Hollis nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'll help you set up. But Greer, be careful. Dax might be right about not investigating on your own. I'm not investigating, she said, positioning the cot where she could see directly into the kennel. I'm just taking care of my patient. But in her heart, she made a silent promise to Lenore. She would find who did this, no matter what her brother said. As she settled onto the cot for the night, Greer could smell traces of smoke still clinging to her clothes. The same chemical undertone that had been present at both fires lingered in her nostrils, a warning she couldn't ignore. Someone was systematically targeting property in their small community, and they weren't above attempted murder to get what they wanted. Hollis finished securing the clinic for the night, double-checking the locks and setting the security system. Before leaving, he paused by Greer's cot. I've backed up all our documentation to a secure cloud storage. Just in case. The weight of what he wasn't saying hung between them. Just in case someone tried to destroy the evidence. Just in case they were next. Greer nodded, grateful for his foresight and support. The puppy shifted in his kennel, letting out a small whine. Greer reached through the bars to gently stroke his head, careful to avoid his injuries. We're going to figure this out, she whispered, both to the pup and herself. Someone knows exactly what happened tonight, and we're going to find out who. The rain continued to fall outside, drumming against the clinic's roof. In the quiet darkness, Greer lay awake, her mind piecing together the pattern that was emerging. The Marshall property. Lenore's farm. The same accelerant. The quick land deals that followed. It wasn't just about property anymore. Someone had crossed a line into violence, and they needed to be stopped before anyone else got hurt. The morning sun streamed through the clinic windows as Greer changed the puppy's bandages. His tail gave a slight wag despite his injuries, and she couldn't help but smile. The peaceful moment shattered when the front door burst open with a bang. A burly man in work clothes stormed in, his heavy boots leaving mud on the freshly mopped floor. Greer recognized him immediately. Harlan Pike, Clayton Stokes' foreman. Her stomach clenched as he approached the counter, his face red with anger. "Where's my dog?" he demanded, slapping a wrinkled paper onto the counter. "I've got the registration right here." Greer picked up the document with trembling fingers. It was a microchip re-registration form, dated that very morning. Her eyes narrowed at the rushed signatures and obviously recent timestamps. "Dr. Rourke needs to review this," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'll get him for you." She found Hollis in his office, quickly explaining the situation. His jaw set in a hard line as he reviewed the paperwork. "Stay here," he instructed. Walking out to meet Pike. "This registration is from this morning," Hollis said calmly, holding up the form. "The dog came in last night with severe burns and trauma consistent with the fire at Lenore Briggs's property. As such, he's evidence in an ongoing investigation." Pike's face darkened. "That's my property you're holding. Hand him over, or there'll be trouble." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Pike?" Hollis's voice remained level, but his eyes hardened. "Just stating facts," Pike growled. He leaned forward, his scarred hands gripping the counter. "Stokes won't be happy about this." "Neither will I." With that, he turned and stalked out, the door slamming behind him. Greer emerged from the office, her hands shaking slightly. "We need to document everything," she said. "And I need to see Lenore." At the hospital, Greer found Lenore sitting up in bed, looking frail but alert. The elderly woman brightened when she saw her visitor. "How's my little hero?" Lenore asked, reaching for Greer's hand. "Fighting hard," Greer assured her. "Lenore, did you notice anything unusual before the fire?" The older woman's face grew serious. "Now that you mention it, that Pike fellow was skulking around my property the day before. Said he was checking property lines for Mr. Stokes." She shook her head. "Been trying to buy my land for months, offering less than half what it's worth. When I wouldn't sell, the pressure started." Greer's heart pounded as pieces started falling into place. She squeezed Lenore's hand. "Thank you for telling me. We're going to figure this out." Back at her car, Greer called Dax. Her brother answered on the second ring. Harlan Pike was at Lenore's property the day before the fire, she said without preamble. "And he just showed up at the clinic trying to claim the dog with paperwork dated this morning." "Greer." Dax's voice held a warning note. "Don't go poking around. Let the investigators handle this." "But Dax, I mean it. These people are dangerous. Stay out of it." Back at the clinic, Greer and Hollis worked methodically, photographing each of the puppy's injuries. The little dog lay quietly on the exam table, trusting despite everything he'd been through. "Burns to all 4 paw pads," Hollis dictated while Greer took pictures. "Second-degree burns along the right flank. Singed whiskers and facial fur consistent with exposure to intense heat." They documented everything: the chemical residue in his fur, the pattern of burns, the paralysis in his hind legs. Each photo was carefully labeled and stored, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence. "He shouldn't have survived this," Hollis said softly, stroking the puppy's head. "But he just keeps fighting." Greer watched the little dog nuzzle Hollis's hand, her heart swelling with determination. This brave puppy was more than just a patient. He was the key to exposing whatever Stokes and Pike had done. His injuries told the story of that terrible night, and his presence at the clinic linked them directly to the crime. She pulled out a notebook and began sketching out security measures: cameras, extra locks, overnight staffing rotations. They couldn't let Pike or Stokes anywhere near him. The puppy dozed under the warm exam lights, unaware of his importance in unraveling the whole scheme. "We need to protect him at all costs," Greer said, continuing to write. "He's our best evidence, and they know it. That's why Pike tried to take him." Hollis nodded, his expression grim but determined. "We'll need to document everything, every interaction, every threat. Pike's visit today proves they're getting desperate." The puppy stirred in his sleep, his good leg twitching as he dreamed. Despite his injuries, there was an undeniable spirit in him that touched everyone who saw him. He'd fought through fire to find help, and now he might be the key to bringing justice for Lenore and stopping Stokes once and for all. As they finished their documentation, Greer felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. Whatever came next, she knew this brave little survivor was at the center of something bigger than anyone had imagined. His will to live had brought him to them, And now that same determination would help them expose the truth. The morning after the confrontation with Pike, Greer sat at the county courthouse's public records terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Beside her, Hollis thumbed through thick folders of property records, his reading glasses perched on his nose. They had been there since the building opened at 8 o'clock in the morning, determined to uncover the truth. "Look at this," Greer whispered, turning her screen toward Hollis. "In the past 5 years, Stokes has created 17 different shell companies. Each one buys land, then transfers it to his main development corporation 6 months later." Hollis leaned in, squinting at the documentation. "And here, Pine Ridge Holdings, Mountain View Enterprises, Valley Stream Development. They all trace back to his office address. But that's not the worst part," Greer continued, pulling up another screen. "Every single property that initially refused to sell. They all got hit with code violations within weeks. Look at the pattern." She pointed to a list of citations: unsafe structures, health hazards, improper waste disposal. The violations seemed minor at first glance, but they piled up quickly, creating expensive headaches for the owners. And then, Hollis added grimly, spreading out a timeline he'd created, fires follow. Always within 3 months of the first citation. Always ruled accidental or cause unknown. His voice was heavy with realization. They worked through lunch, piecing together the pattern. By mid-afternoon, they had filled 2 legal pads with notes and printed dozens of documents. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. A clear pattern of harassment and destruction, targeting those who stood in Stokes's way. Their victory was short-lived. When they returned to the clinic, a man in a crisp suit waited by the front door, holding a clipboard and wearing an official-looking badge. "Health Department," he announced curtly. "We've received reports of potential contamination from fire damage. I need to conduct an immediate inspection." Greer's heart sank as she watched the inspector move through the clinic, making exaggerated notes about smoke, residue, and chemical exposure risks. His citations were creative, but obviously manufactured, the kind of violations that would cost thousands to address. "This facility will need to cease operations until these issues are resolved," he declared, handing over a thick stack of paperwork. Public safety concerns. Before they could even process this blow, another suit appeared, this one carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expensive watch. "I represent Clayton Stokes Properties," the lawyer said smoothly, extending an envelope. "As the owner of this building, my client is exercising his right to terminate Dr. Rourke's lease, effective in 30 days. Hollis took the envelope with steady hands, but Greer could see the muscle working in his jaw. They watched both men leave, their expensive shoes clicking on the parking lot pavement. "He's trying to shut us down," Greer said quietly. "He knows we're getting close." Hollis nodded, already reading through the lease termination notice. "We need something concrete. Something that ties him or Pike directly to what happened." Greer's eyes lit up. "The gas station. The one on Mason Street. It's right between Lenore's place and the clinic. They might have security cameras." Within an hour, Greer was reviewing footage with the station's owner, a kind elderly man who remembered her from high school. The timestamps matched the night of the fire, and there, just after 11:30 at night, she saw it. The injured puppy crawled into view, dragging himself across the wet pavement. And behind him, moving slowly, headlights dimmed, was Pike's distinctive black pickup truck. The footage showed the truck following the puppy for several blocks until the dog disappeared under highway traffic. Pike's vehicle then made a quick U-turn and sped away. "Can I get a copy of this?" Greer asked, her voice trembling with excitement. The owner nodded, already working to transfer the footage. Back at the clinic, Hollis watched the video 3 times, his expression growing more determined with each viewing. "This proves the puppy came from the fire scene," he said. "And shows Pike following him, trying to prevent him from reaching help, while Hollis began making copies of the footage and securing it in multiple locations. Greer noticed him making phone calls to security companies, to his insurance agent, to his lawyer. She understood. They needed to protect themselves and their evidence. That evening, as Greer changed the puppy's bandages, she noticed new security cameras being installed throughout the clinic. Hollis had also added new locks to the medication storage and filing cabinets. The puppy wagged his tail at her, seeming to sense their small victory. "We're not giving up," she told him softly, gently stroking his healing ears. "You fought so hard to get here, to show us the truth. We're going to fight just as hard for you and Lenore." The health inspector's report sat on the front desk, its threats looming. The lease termination notice lay beside it. But now they had something concrete, proof that connected Pike to the aftermath of the fire, evidence that showed the puppy's desperate journey for help. It wasn't everything they needed, but it was a start. Dr. Hollis Rourke sat at his desk late that evening, reviewing the injured puppy's medical chart under the warm glow of his desk lamp. The clinic was quiet except for the gentle whir of the heating system and occasional whimpers from the kennels. He flipped through the pages, documenting every detail of the pup's recovery when something caught his eye on the physical examination notes. There, in the photographs of the puppy's belly, was an old surgical scar, one that made Hollis's heart skip a beat. The distinctive cross-stitch pattern was unmistakable. He'd developed that specific suturing technique himself years ago, preferring it for its strength and minimal scarring. Hollis leaned closer, his hand starting to shake. "No," he whispered, memories flooding back. It can't be, but it was. 3 years ago, he'd done relief work at a private kennel on weekends to help make ends meet. The kennel had been owned by Clayton Stokes, though Hollis hadn't known the significance then. He remembered treating dozens of injured dogs, never questioning the explanations of accidents and fights. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Stokes had used his medical skills and professional reputation to patch up dogs injured in his operations, creating a paper trail of legitimate veterinary care to cover up the real causes. Shame burned in his chest, quickly followed by a wave of fury that made him push back from his desk. He'd been manipulated, made complicit in Stokes's schemes without even knowing it. The thought made him sick. "Greer!" he called out, his voice rough with emotion. "Could you come in here?" Greer appeared in the doorway, concern etching her features at his tone. "What's wrong?" "Close the door," Hollis said, running a hand through his graying hair. "I need to tell you something." As Greer settled into the chair across from him, Hollis explained everything: the weekend work at Stokes's kennel, his distinctive suture pattern, and what it meant finding it on their current patient. This wasn't just about Lenore's land, he concluded, his voice tight. This is a pattern, a playbook Stokes has been running for years. He hurts animals, uses them as weapons against people who won't sell, then covers his tracks with legitimate vet care. I helped him do it, Greer, without even knowing. Greer reached across the desk, placing her hand over his. You couldn't have known. But now we do, and that changes everything. Just then, a knock at the outer door made them both jump. Captain Dax Coltrane stood there, still in his uniform, looking troubled. Greer let him in, the tension between siblings momentarily set aside by the gravity of the situation. I needed to tell you something off the record, Dax said, glancing around as if checking for listeners. The fire marshal's investigation is getting nowhere fast. Every time we make progress, something happens. Evidence gets misplaced. Witnesses change their stories. Paperwork gets delayed. Someone's applying pressure from above. Stokes, Greer said grimly. We just found proof he's been doing this for years. While Hollis explained his discovery to Dax, Greer moved to the recovery kennel where their brave little patient rested. She'd been working on something special for him, a tiny wheeled cart she'd ordered and customized to support his paralyzed back legs. The manufacturer had rushed the delivery after hearing their story. "Hey, sweetie," she murmured, opening the kennel door. The puppy's tail thumped weakly against the blankets, his eyes bright despite everything he'd been through. "Want to try something new?" With gentle hands, she fitted the cart's harness around his chest and adjusted the wheels to the proper height. The puppy looked uncertain at first, but as Greer helped him stand, his eyes widened with surprise. His back legs were supported by the cart, allowing him to move forward using his front legs. "That's it," she encouraged as he took his first tentative steps. "You've got this." Hollis and Dax came to watch, their faces softening at the sight of the puppy's determination. He was wobbly and unsure, but with each passing minute he gained confidence, wheeling himself in small circles in the treatment area. "He's not giving up," Greer said, wiping tears from her eyes. "And neither are we. This cart isn't just about mobility," Hollis added, his voice thick with emotion. "It's about getting him ready for what's ahead. The investigation, possibly testimony if we can prove Stokes's involvement. He'll need to be strong," Dax nodded, his professional demeanor cracking slightly as the puppy rolled over to investigate his boots. "I'll keep pushing on the fire marshal's investigation, but quietly. We can't tip our hand too soon." The puppy continued practicing with his cart, each successful step a small victory against those who had tried to silence him. As they watched him navigate his new wheels, all three of them understood that this wasn't just about one fire or one piece of land anymore. This was about exposing years of corruption and cruelty, about bringing light to dark places where money and power had kept truth buried. Hollis's discovery of his own unwitting involvement had transformed their understanding of the case. What had seemed like an isolated incident of arson was now revealed as part of a calculated pattern stretching back years. The puppy's old surgical scar was more than just evidence. It was a thread that, when pulled, might unravel Stokes's entire operation. As evening settled over the clinic, Greer watched the puppy finally curl up for a nap, exhausted but triumphant in his newfound mobility. The little cart stood as a symbol of resilience, of moving forward despite overwhelming odds. They would need that spirit in the days ahead, as they gathered their evidence and prepared to face whatever Stokes might throw at them next. The weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air, but with it came a sense of purpose. They had the truth now, or at least part of it, and that truth would light their way forward, no matter how dark the path might become. The morning sun streamed through the clinic windows as Greer Langley taped up the bright yellow poster announcing Community Adoption Day in big, friendly letters. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down the edges, knowing this wasn't just any adoption event. It was a carefully laid trap. "Do you really think he'll show?" Dr. Hollis Rourke asked, standing behind her with a stack of documentation forms clutched to his chest. "Harlan won't be able to resist," Greer replied, stepping back to examine her handiwork. "He's getting desperate, and this is his chance to grab the puppy in plain sight with what he thinks is legal paperwork." The injured puppy, now equipped with a tiny wheeled cart to help him move around, wagged his tail from his spot near the reception desk. His burns were healing nicely, pink skin showing through where fur was starting to grow back. Hollis nodded grimly and went to his office to call Captain Dax Coltrane. They needed everything in place before Saturday. Word about the adoption event spread quickly through their small town. Greer made sure of it, posting on community boards and asking regular clients to share the news. "Everything's set," Hollis told her later that day. "Dax has arranged for plainclothes officers to be here, mixing in with the families. The security cameras are all working, and I've made copies of all our evidence off-site." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Greer and the clinic staff arranged the waiting room to accommodate multiple families, setting up chairs and a play area for children. They prepared legitimate adoption paperwork for the other animals, making sure everything appeared completely normal. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. Families started arriving early, creating a cheerful atmosphere as children cooed over the cats and dogs available for adoption. The injured puppy, now named Hope by the clinic staff, remained in his special area near the front desk where Greer could keep a close eye on him. "There he is," Hollis muttered under his breath around 10 o'clock, nodding toward the entrance. Harlan Pike pushed through the door, his broad shoulders tight with tension. He clutched a manila envelope in one meaty hand. Greer's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady as she greeted him. "Welcome to our adoption day. Are you interested in giving a forever home to one of our animals?" Harlan's permanent sneer deepened as he slapped the envelope onto the counter. "I'm here to claim my property. Got all the paperwork right here, registration, proof of ownership, everything." Hollis stepped forward, maintaining a professional demeanor. "Let me take a look at those documents, Mr. Pike." He opened the envelope and began examining the papers while Greer watched Harlan's face grow increasingly red. "These appear to be irregularly filed," Hollis said carefully, noting the obvious signs of forgery. "I'm afraid I'll need to verify these with the county registry." "To hell with that," Harlan exploded. Several parents pulled their children closer as his voice rose. "That's my dog and I'm taking him now." He lunged around the counter, reaching for Hope. The puppy yelped in fear, trying to scoot away in his wheeled cart. Greer stepped between them, but Harlan shoved her roughly aside. That's when everything happened at once. Two plainclothes officers emerged from the crowd, while a uniformed officer who had been stationed by the back door rushed forward. "Police, stop right there." Hollis helped Greer to her feet as they watched the officers subdue Harlan, who was shouting threats and struggling against their grip. Parents hurried their children outside, but a few stayed to give statements about witnessing the assault. "Harlan Pike, you're under arrest for assault and attempted theft," the officer announced, securing the handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." As they led Harlan away, Greer felt a powerful mix of relief and triumph. She knelt beside Hope, who was trembling but unhurt. "We did it," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "We got him." Dax appeared in the doorway, his firefighter's jacket still on from his shift. He gave Greer a quick nod of approval. "Good work, sis. The forged paperwork alone is enough to hold him, but the assault charges will stick too. We've got multiple witnesses." Hollis was already gathering the evidence, the forged documents, security camera footage, witness statements. "I'll make copies of everything," he said. "We can't be too careful." That evening, after the excitement had died down and the remaining adoptions had been processed successfully, Hollis did a final walkthrough of the clinic. He checked every lock twice, verified the alarm system was armed, and ensured the security cameras were recording properly. "A good day's work," he said to Greer, who was finishing up at the front desk. "It feels like we're finally getting somewhere," she agreed, but noticed his worried expression. "What's wrong?" "Just being cautious," he replied, patting the USB drive in his pocket that contained backup copies of all their evidence. "Harlan's arrest is a win, but we both know he's just the muscle. Stokes is still out there, and he won't take this lying down." Greer watched Hope sleeping peacefully in his bed near her desk, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. The victory felt real. They had the footage of Harlan's truck following the puppy, Lenore's testimony about seeing him near her property before the fire, the matching accelerant evidence, and now this arrest with multiple witnesses. But she understood Hollis's caution. This was just one battle in a larger war. The evening shadows stretched long across the clinic floor as darkness settled in. Greer was finishing up some paperwork while the rescued puppy dozed nearby in his wheeled cart, his soft snores a gentle comfort in the quiet building. Dr. Hollis had gone to check the circuit breakers after noticing some flickering lights in the back storage area. Suddenly, the clinic plunged into total darkness. The gentle hum of equipment died, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the puppy's startled whimper. "Hollis?" Greer called out, reaching for her phone's flashlight. Before she could turn it on, She heard the distinct sound of metal scraping against the front door lock. Her heart jumped into her throat as heavy footsteps entered the clinic. Through the dim light filtering in from outside, she recognized Clayton Stokes's broad-shouldered silhouette. He carried a crowbar in one hand and what looked like a red jerry can in the other. The sight sent ice through her veins. "Time to clean house," Stokes muttered, his voice carrying in the silence. Greer backed away quietly, guiding the puppy's cart toward the X-ray room. Her mind raced to her brother Dax's warning from earlier that week. Have a backup plan ready. These guys play dirty when cornered. She'd taken his advice seriously, programming an emergency text into the clinic's computer system. Now she just needed to reach it. The sound of break-in glass echoed from the medication storage area. Greer could smell the sharp tang of medical solvents as bottles shattered. Her stomach turned. She knew enough about fires to recognize Stokes was creating an accelerant trail. Before she could make it to the main computer, Stokes's flashlight beam caught her. She ducked into the X-ray room, but he was faster than she expected. The door slammed behind her, and she heard the click of the lock engaging. "You should have minded your own business," Stokes called through the door, his voice eerily calm. "Now you'll watch everything burn." Greer forced herself to take steady breaths, fighting down panic. The puppy pressed against the glass door, whining softly but refusing to leave her side, even as wisps of smoke began curling under the door. "It's okay, buddy," she whispered, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. The clinic's computer system could be accessed remotely. She just needed to stay focused. In the hallway, Stokes's footsteps moved methodically from room to room. More crashes followed, the sound of evidence being destroyed. The smell of smoke grew stronger. Dr. Hollis's voice suddenly rang out from the back of the clinic. "What are you doing? Stop!" A heavy thud and grunt followed, the sound of a struggle. Greer's fingers flew across her phone screen, accessing the clinic system. The smoke was getting thicker now, making her eyes water. The puppy's cart squeaked against the floor as he pawed at the door, his distress growing with each passing second. "Stay with me," Greer murmured, finally pulling up the emergency protocol she'd programmed. Through the door's window, she could see Stokes's satisfied expression as he surveyed the spreading smoke. He'd clearly planned this carefully, a fire that would destroy both evidence and business in one brutal stroke. Time seemed to compress into heartbeats as Greer activated the emergency alert. The smoke was seeping in faster now, and she could hear the crackle of flames taking hold in the medication room. The puppy pressed harder against the door, his wheeled cart rattling with each movement, but he wouldn't leave her even as the danger grew. Stokes's footsteps echoed in the hallway, confident and unhurried. He believed he had won, that the fire would finish what his legal pressure and threats had failed to accomplish. But Greer held on to hope, knowing her message was already racing through the emergency system. She just had to hold on, keeping herself and the loyal puppy alive until help arrived. The smoke continued its relentless advance under the door as precious seconds ticked by, each one carrying the weight of survival. Through the glass, Greer could see the orange glow of flames beginning to paint the hallway walls, while Stokes's dark figure moved through his destructive work like a shadow given form. The solvent splashed across the clinic floor in dark rivers, its chemical smell burning Greer's nostrils as she pressed against the X-ray room's locked door. Her heart pounded against her ribs while smoke began curling under the doorframe. Through the glass panel, she could see the puppy in his cart, refusing to leave despite her desperate gestures for him to go to safety. The little dog's eyes locked with hers, filled with determination. He backed his cart up, wheels squeaking on the linoleum. Then, with all his might, he rammed forward. The cart hit the wall, but missed the alarm lever. He backed up again, readjusted, and charged once more. "Come on, buddy," Greer whispered, her throat tight with fear and hope. "You can do this." On the third try, the cart's edge caught the fire alarm lever, yanking it down. Instantly, piercing sirens filled the air. their screech echoing off the clinic walls. Relief flooded through Greer. Help would come now. Outside the room, she heard Stokes curse. The flames were spreading faster now, following the trails of spilled chemicals. The heat was building, making the air shimmer through the door's window. Suddenly, there was a tremendous crash of breaking glass from the side of the building. Dr. Hollis's voice called out, "Greer!" "Hold on." Through the smoke, she saw him appear at the X-ray room's window, his face streaked with soot. Without hesitation, he smashed through the glass with a fire extinguisher. "Come on," he shouted, reaching for her. Greer scrambled toward him as heat mushroomed through the clinic. The flames were racing up the walls now, hungry and fierce. Hollis grabbed her arms and hauled her through the broken window, shards of glass tinkling around them as they tumbled onto the grass outside. But they weren't safe yet. Stokes burst through the smoke behind them, crowbar raised high. His face was contorted with rage, his expensive suit now soaked with chemicals and sweat. "You've ruined everything," he snarled, swinging the metal bar in a vicious arc. Hollis shoved Greer aside and took the full force of the blow across his shoulder. He grunted in pain but didn't fall. Instead, he launched himself at Stokes, tackling the larger man backward through the doorway. They crashed down into a puddle of spilled solvent just as the sprinkler system finally kicked in. Water rained down from the ceiling, creating curtains of spray that mixed with the smoke. The chemicals on the floor began to dilute and wash away as Hollis and Stokes grappled on the wet floor. The sound of sirens grew, louder, but not just the fire alarm now. Emergency vehicles were approaching fast. Through the front windows, Greer saw familiar red lights flashing. Her brother Dax's fire truck screeched to a halt outside, followed by several police cruisers. Dax led his crew through the front entrance, axes ready, while water cascaded down around them. They moved with practiced efficiency, securing the scene as uniformed officers rushed in behind them. Two policemen, already heading their way thanks to Hollis's earlier 911 call, immediately pulled Stokes off Hollis and slapped handcuffs around his wrists. "You're under arrest," one officer announced firmly, reading Stokes's rights while the developers sputtered and threatened lawsuits. Through it all, the puppy remained steadfast in his cart, wheels locked in place where he'd triggered the alarm. He was trembling, but his eyes never left Greer. She rushed to him, scooping him up while careful not to disturb his healing legs. "You brave, brave boy," she whispered, holding him close as firefighters worked to ventilate the smoke and secure the building. Hollis approached them, holding his injured shoulder but managing a tired smile. "The evidence room is intact," he reported. "All our documentation, the photos, everything, it survived." Stokes failed. Greer looked around the clinic. Water dripped from every surface, and scorch marks climbed the walls. Glass and debris littered the floors, and the acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. But the building's structure held firm. Like them, it had weathered the storm. Dax appeared beside them, his firefighter's uniform covered in soot. "You okay?" he asked Greer gruffly, concern evident in his voice despite his professional demeanor. She nodded, still cradling the puppy. "Thanks to this little hero," she said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "And thanks to you coming so fast when you got my alert. That's what family's for," Dax replied quietly, then turned to coordinate with his crew on the final safety sweep. Outside, they could hear Stokes raging as officers loaded him into a patrol car. His threats and protests faded as the car pulled away, taking with it years of corruption and violence. The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, its golden light filtering through the smoke-stained windows of the clinic. The puppy licked Greer's cheek, his tail wagging despite everything they'd been through. In that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of chaos but supported by newfound allies and restored family bonds, Greer knew they had done more than just survive. They had triumphed. The clinic was battered but standing, and most importantly, the truth could no longer be burned away. The weeks following, Stokes's arrest brought a cascade of justice that swept through the county like a cleansing rain. In the courthouse, charges stacked up against Clayton Stokes like a house of cards. Arson, racketeering, and insurance fraud topped the list. The evidence Greer and Hollis had preserved proved invaluable, each document and photograph adding another brick to the wall of prosecution. Harlan Pike, facing his own lengthy sentence, made the pragmatic choice to cooperate. His detailed testimony about years of strong-arm tactics and staged accidents helped the state build an airtight case. As Pike spoke, the web of corruption began to unravel, leading to several county officials stepping down under mounting pressure from state investigators. For Lenore Briggs, victory came in the form of a simple document, her property deed, now officially clear of all claims and challenges. "This land stays in the family," she declared from her wheelchair on her rebuilt porch, a peaceful smile on her weathered face. The health department, under new oversight, quickly reversed their spurious shutdown order on the clinic. Hollis received an official apology, along with expedited permits to continue operations. Better still, a local business owner, one of the families who'd attended the fateful adoption day, stepped forward to purchase the building. They offered Hollis a long-term lease with terms that showed true community support. 10 years, fixed rate, Hollis told Greer as they hung the new clinic sign. "No more wondering if we'll have a home next month." The changes weren't just professional. The crucible of crisis had forged new bonds and mended old ones. Dax began stopping by the clinic regularly, no longer just the stern fire captain, but a brother rediscovering his sister's strength. One evening, as he helped repair some fire damage, he finally spoke about their years of distance. "I was wrong," he admitted, setting down his tools. "I thought I was protecting you by pushing you to take the safe path. But you showed me what real courage looks like." Greer leaned against the newly painted wall, emotions tight in her throat. "We both had some growing to do," she replied softly. "Maybe we needed all this to remember we're stronger together." The most joyful moment came when Greer formally adopted the brave puppy who had started it all. She named him Rook, like the chess piece, she explained to Hollis. "Small but mighty. The piece that can outmaneuver giants." Rook took to his new name as enthusiastically as he took to his wheeled cart, zooming through the clinic's repaired hallways with infectious energy. His presence became a symbol of their triumph, a reminder that even the smallest and most vulnerable could stand up to power and win. Standing in the clinic's mended hallway, watching Rook roll confidently forward, Greer and Hollis walked side by side as true partners. They were no longer the overlooked receptionist and the compromised vet. They had become champions of justice who had faced down corruption and won. "Ready for another day?" Hollis asked, medical charts tucked under his arm. "Always," Greer replied, reaching down to scratch Rook's ears as he wheeled alongside them. "On our terms this time." The morning sun streamed through clear windows, highlighting the fresh paint and new beginnings. Their work would continue, but now with the strength of vindication and the knowledge that they had not just survived, but triumphed. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.